Tonight, Andrew and I are talking about Dharma. Dharma is a Sanskrit word that loosely translates into English as that which sustains the universe. The Sanskrit words, they don't have direct correlates with English, but it's a very precious and valuable concept on the path of development of consciousness, because Dharma is a universal phenomenon. When we say sustains the universe, we mean exists in all parts of the universe and has that quality or ability to support life in alignment with cosmic evolution. With we could say that one being, one eternal original source of everything is evolving. And as humans and all the parts of creation are evolving in tandem with that one creation, that one big evolution. But part of the process of expansion, of the expression of wholeness, is that the edges of wholeness stretch. They have to stretch open. Mm-hmm. So what happens is the flow of evolution is moving forward, and the human beings are like, I wonder what happens if I go this way. And so what happens is the more we start to move away from the original flow of cosmic evolution. And so that original flow, we could say, is the fundamental of Dharma. And so we start to pull away from it like that. And that the further away we get, the more of a tension is created between our momentum and the momentum of the universe that's going forward. And so eventually the tension becomes so great that the individual has to sort of snap back into alignment with cosmic potential. But the stretch is enough to bulge that expansion. It bulges out the flow of cosmic evolution, also allowing it to also grow. So there's definitely a place for all forms of evolution, all forms of desire and intention. But the principle of Dharma is that it kind of holds fast the center of the flow of divine evolution, or the evolution of the source of creation. Dharma, I could go on to say I could launch now into the four legs of Dharma, but maybe Andrew, you'd like to make some comment on what I just said, and then we can do some of that other later.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that was really, really great. I love the understanding of that tension that develops as there appears to be this sort of pulling away from the most aligned possibility. And so I feel like that's what Dharma really is alignment and degree of alignment. And when we are more aligned with our Dharma, then we feel more support, we feel more power, we feel a greater sense of connection and stability. And that's really what all of us are looking for. But along the edges of that cosmic flow, what we see are all of these various possibilities and choices and options. And some of them appear to be very tantalizing and exciting and all of those different things. And so as these different options are seen, there's this sort of movement to try that out, as you were saying, and to see if that has something that I'm not really finding here. And sometimes we go on these, apparently long journeys trying to find what has always been here and has always been our very essence and what is most fundamental to our experience. And I think that a lot of times, because of its simplicity and because of its at-homeness and its obviousness, it seems the most hard to see.
Yeah, right. So close.
Yeah. And we've all been conditioned to look elsewhere, to kind of look out there.
Yeah.
And we inherit those programs and ideas that say, this is what you should do, and this is where you will find happiness, or whatever the idea is, whatever the notion is that sort of activates our movement to try and force something in a certain sense. Because I think that to the degree that we're not aligned with that flow of cosmic evolution, with that dharmic direction, is to the degree that we feel a sense of kind of forcefulness or effort. And as we're aligned with that dharmic flow, there's this effortlessness that comes into being. So more and more we're attuned to an effortlessness. But as you so beautifully pointed out, getting lost in effort and feeling the tension and the contraction of that can also be a part of sort of snapping us back into place, if you will. And in that, there's a new level of appreciation for the in-placeness
Oh, yes.
of that flow.
Oh, yes.
So it's almost as if through exploring that side trail, if you will, we've gained a deeper appreciation for the truth of our Dharma, for the truth of our direction as it relates to the whole. And most of these kind of sidestepping possibilities all have to do with getting for me. They're not really aligned with the totality most of the time. And even if they do seem to be aligned with the totality, I think that they still, just because of the concealment of truth, still have this muddiness surrounding our certainty about that. So we still have these patterns that we picked up that are telling us that this makes us worthy, or this will complete us, or whatever the case may be. And so we're not coming from completion. We're still in a movement to try to find completion, even though there might be, these might be virtuous paths, whatever the case may be. And when we are aligned with that dharmic direction, when we're aligned with that flow, we're coming from completion. Right. And then on the basis of that completion, on the basis of that certainty, we are able to truly express what it is that we are here to express.
Oh, it's so beautiful. So one of the ideas that I see you kind of weaving around in your description is this principle that when we're in the flow of Dharma, then all of nature is kind of like backing us up. That we have that the flow of Dharma, or the flow of cosmic evolution, is administrated, we could say, by the laws of nature. And so when we're more like in the center of that flow, like being in the center of the river, sort of, we have the wind at our backs, we have all of natural law working on our behalf to support whatever the intention of the moment is, whatever that dharmic intention is. And that when we get off on a side tangent, what happens is we start to get out of alignment with the natural law. And so then it involves more effort, because we don't have those laws of nature holding us up and bolstering us as we're going along. And of course, a lot of times it does seem as if the process of getting off on a side tangent is also part of the evolutionary process, because, if you have always the wind at your back and always the support of nature, then the question in my mind is that, maybe you can help me answer it, that then there's kind of a feeling of, well, I don't become strong because I'm not holding myself up. But what I was thinking about it was that we give different amounts of freedom to different aspects of our own nature. And one of the aspects of our nature is conscience. And conscience is, by definition, aligned with Dharma. Conscience is, of course, always thinking from the angle of, what is in the highest and best interest of absolutely everybody at this point. So it's interesting that some people give their conscience lots of freedom, to always dominate. If a choice comes up and the conscience says this, and then the other part of you, some other part says something else, they're like, oh, I'm always going to go with conscience. But I think sometimes people get a little bit like like you said, they kind of want to explore different side possibilities, or see, test their own strength, like, well, how strong can I be moving away from natural law before I'm brought back, or something like that. And of course, like I said, anytime someone starts to diverge from the natural flow of the evolution or expansion of the creation, what happens is that stretches the creation out a little bit, and it also causes some expansion because there's something there.
Yeah.
If the human intention says, oh, I'm going to explore in this direction, it means there's something there. Even if it's absolutely awful, even if a person decides to become a mass murderer or something completely awful, there's still something that's being allowed to manifest there. And so the wholeness, it won't go onto mass murder. It can't go. But something, there's something. The laws of how karmas interact with each other, or there's some value, there's something to be learned. And so then what happens is, even though it's a divergence from natural law, it's like the world allows it. This world allows suffering. It allows us to make mistakes and do stuff like that. So anyway, so I guess my question was, if there are other aspects of self other than conscience, which are so aligned with Dharma that if they could also be allowed to have free reign in this world, and still one could like depend on that. I mean, I have my own ideas of what that might be, but I would love to hear your impressions too.
Sure. So let me just make sure I'm hearing you. So just the possibility of different aspects of our experience or different aspects of ourself that are aligned with Dharma, being given more attention and being more freedom
like,
to,
we don't put boundaries on them so much. We're like, conscience, you always get a yes from me,
Right,
You're always, I'm always devoted to doing whatever is suggested by conscience, because conscience is wise.
Beautiful. Okay, yeah. So it's interesting because for most of us, a lot of those aspects of our experience that are aligned with Dharma are initially asleep, or they're not cultivated in our society, in our culture.
Beautiful.
And so it's a matter of them coming online again. Not that they're not there, but they've just sort of become calcified to a certain degree through not really being enlivened, not being used, not being given that freedom. And
like
in
the
a way,
concept of Dharma itself, right? Like, we all have Dharma, but it's a word that isn't even in the English language. We have to borrow from Sanskrit to get it.
Yes.
But it's really important. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
It is. Yeah, no, of course, that's it. And we're in a period where it's a reawakening of Dharma.
Yeah.
So we have those laws of nature, those aspects of self, those aspects of intelligence, which are aligned with Dharma, have been asleep, to a certain degree. And that varies for each one of us on what appears to be our, the individual complex level. And so you could say that our job, to a certain degree, is to allow for those aspects of self, which are more and more aligned with Dharma, to be reawakened within our physiology. And there's different ways in which we can support that, and we can be aligned with the reawakening.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, I was thinking also, traditionally, I was going to say there are four pillars of Dharma, but traditionally, there are also different, I would say, avenues of Dharma. And I think it would be nice to sort of just define those really quickly. Like, there's a lifetime Dharma, and I'm not sure if I know them all exactly, but I'll give what I know, what I feel confident with. So there's a lifetime Dharma, which means the child Dharma is different from the teenager Dharma, which is different from the young adult Dharma, which is different from the middle adult who are parents Dharma, which is different from old age Dharma. So their Dharma is associated with the different times of life. There are also occupational dharmas, which are related to, how should where is the most appropriate flow of my attention and time during my life in order to have the best effect for myself and for those I love and for my community.
Hmm.
And then there are also I think like ethnic dharmas or cultural dharmas,
Hmm.
like collective dharmas. They're
Yeah.
collective dharmas, so that it's, of course, for example, if you live in a community near the equator, there will be different actions that you perform that are appropriate that would be completely different from, say a group of people who are living up near the Arctic Circle, something like
Hmm.
that. That their dharma is associated with our relationship with nature.
Hmm.
That makes sense. So
Yeah.
those are the three I know about. Do you know any others?
Yeah. No, that sounds like really comprehensive. I think that what I'm getting is that all dharmas in that in the um, strata of expression that you're speaking about now
Yeah.
have to do with the context, with the proximate environment
Mm-hmm.
within which they appear. So they'll never be out of place. They'll always be in place. And it's sort of like situational ethics,
Right.
situational placement and what's appropriate. And it has to do with the context. It has to do with the environment, with the field within which that particular activity, a thread of experiencing is arising. So it can also be instant to instant dharma, moment to moment
Mhm.
dharma, day by day dharma, because although that's included, it's like dharmas within dharmas within dharmas within dharmas, and it's this, so we have a broader dharma that includes our, occupation lifetime dharma. And then, of course, that includes the age periods like you were talking about.
Right.
And then that includes the cultural context and, the proximate environment where the perceived locality of the body is and all of those different things. And then within that, there's even finer levels of dharma, which include, where you are at a given moment and
Right.
who's around you and all of those different factors. What your level of consciousness is, what, how are you seeing yourself in reference to the other, and of course, the more clear you are about yourself, the more clear the Dharma is going to be, to
Right.
a certain degree. The more spontaneous it will be, the less intentional, and coming from having heard it and having to remember it will it be. It'll be something that arises purely from the knowing of the heart on the basis of the whole.
Beautiful. Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah. So could we say then that one aspect of the individual that is has a significant bearing on alignment with Dharma is ego or sense of self,
Mm-hmm.
of how one knows oneself, that knowing oneself is a key factor, I guess factor is a good word, the key factor in being spontaneously aligned with all of nature,
Mm.
spontaneously aligned with one's divine reality, so that it's like there's my individual self, and then there's the cosmic individual body and the cosmic body, and the degree to which the individual consciousness is integrated with both one's own individual physiology and also one's cosmic body
Mm-hmm.
be will definitely impact decisions that are made on the level of like occupation and how do I treat the people around me, and how do I fit in this situation. There's But there is a kind of a larger form of dharma too. There's a
Mm-hmm.
kind of larger or a more, I would say, universal or broad aspect of it, which
Yes.
is based on the four pillars of dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And the four pillars are truth. And these are English words, okay? And the actual original Sanskrit meanings are a little different. So I'm just going to give the best I can description. But
Yeah.
truth or wisdom, knowledge, Compassion, that can also include love and forgiveness and empathy and mercy.
Mm.
And orderliness, which also includes like cleanliness. And then the last one, which is a little harder to interpret, but the Sanskrit word is tapas, but it can be understood as letting go or being
Mm-hmm.
unattached,
Mm-hmm.
or being able to. Tapas can mean folding back into the source of creation
Mm-hmm.
in order to find that fulfillment that you talked about earlier,
Mm.
so that it's not necessary to seek outside the self
Yes.
for the fulfillment.
Mm.
So that's tapas is the last one. And the thing about the four pillars, which is very interesting, is that they hold different strengths at different time periods in history. And at the current time period in history, the three pillars, compassion, orderliness, and the ability to let go or be unattached, are not as strong as they have been at other times in the past.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is still strong. And when I say that, what I mean is that in any given situation, no matter how challenging it is, bringing truth or coming back to truth will guarantee a evolutionary effect in that
Yes.
situation. Even
Mm.
sometimes people don't want to hear it's an inconvenient truth, but still, even if it's an inconvenient truth or an unwanted truth, it will still have an evolutionary effect.
Yes.
Three at this time can be easily overdone.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is the truth factor, which is dependable and reliable and steady, can act like a splint to the other three.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as discrimination is being used, you can be compassionate, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're in this day and age, if a person's too compassionate, you can be taken advantage of, or you
Right.
can end up enabling people to not stand on their own feet and be strong within themselves, something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious what's good about compassion, but
Yeah.
it is possible to, like, you can't, it doesn't always work in every situation, right? So you need to have that discrimination along with
Mm-hmm.
in order to make it stable. And same with the orderliness. If it's overdone, it becomes fascism. And tapas, if it's overdone, it becomes like self-deprecation. And so, guess what you're going to say.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's beautiful. I was just going to say that, and it's the same with truth without compassion. Also has its
Right.
limitations in terms of, its expression, the way in which it is presented.
Mm.
And I've sort of learned the hard way with that, you might say, in terms of kind of a more masculine edge to the expression of truth that's not really tempered by and surrounded and softened by the truth of compassion. And so it's so important to have that. Although the truth is rock solid and sturdy, and even when it does have that, sort of, it's there, and it may not be the finest expression of it, and it may not be the thing that we want to hear at the moment. It still has evolutionary potency, but that is increased greatly when it's present with compassion, and it's present with orderliness, and it's present with tapas.
And so maybe that's one way of understanding being like in the center of the flow of Dharma,
Yeah.
is that then one is drawing upon all four legs of Dharma in a balanced and wise, with wisdom, all four of them working together in tandem. And that is the way Dharma is, that it's best when all four legs of Dharma are standing strong. And
Yes.
even though at this time in history, we can just, taking a simple look at the environment, we can see that we can't always depend on all four legs completely
Right.
all the time, or any one of them, but we can see that the last strong leg, the leg of truth, is wavering just a little bit.
Yes.
We look at like the way the internet works and so much knowledge everywhere, and that it's a little hard to tell sometimes what is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But I think your point is so beautifully taken, that even though truth will always be evolutionary, even if it comes out in a harsh way, it still will have an evolutionary effect.
Yeah.
It's so much more easily absorbed and enjoyed if it comes with some compassion.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's a saying that honey catches more flies than vinegar, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. And just
yeah, and it becomes, you know, it's kind of like that proselytizing kind of attitude that we've seen in different religious contexts and things. So it's something,
right.
you know, I love your point about how, although truth is that foundational pillar, which now sort of is supporting the unfoldment of the rest, we could say, or the reawakening or enlivening of the rest, and at least to our perception, it still is covered to a certain degree. It still sort of has different, it's yeah, it's limited. It's not its fullest expression. And so its fullest expression comes into being as it, you know, is supported by the other four. And I think one of the most helpful understandings is to recognize that it's not an either or kind of a situation in this context. You know, there's a spectrum, there's a whole range, and we're in an infinite field of subjectivity, conscious awareness.
Mm.
So whatever the conscious awareness takes itself to be, it feels that it is and feels is going on, seems to have a reality, even though it probably, you know, most likely doesn't on this planet. But it still seems to, you know, and it seems very certain to the one that we are, that is experiencing itself in that sort of limited position. So having the understanding of the spectrum is extremely helpful, because it moves us out of that dualistic kind of either or positioning
Yes.
and gives us a certain level of compassion, right? Because when we have that spectrum understanding, compassion comes with it, because it's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's not should or shouldn't. It's an understanding that sees with the eyes of compassion, and then holds that in a broader context of truth.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love this idea that the compassion can interface with the truth and add richness and depth to it.
Hmm.
Because what that means is that the constituent s- structures or parts of Dharma can self-interact. The Dharma itself can self-interact.
Yeah.
And in doing so, it can bring its own nature better into alignment with cosmic evolution.
Hmm.
When the compassion aspect interacts with the truth aspect, and when the truth aspect interacts with the other aspects, it brings the whole structure of Dharma wholeness,
Mm.
into a wholeness. And you touched on something really interesting here. I think this is what you were saying. So correct me if I'm wrong. That one of the things that we're dealing with here is the fact that knowledge is different in different states of consciousness, and everybody's individual reality is a little different.
Hmm.
So, what's right for me, or what my conscience tells me is aligned with Dharma, could be a little different from what somebody else's conscience is telling them.
Yeah.
Um, and that even though we all seemingly live in the same reality and we all come from the same original source,
Hmm.
there are these, as experience perceives its own nature closer and closer to the surface express level,
Hmm.
that there are these varying degrees of separation,
Hmm.
and that based on the degrees of separation, people's realities can be quite different. It can seem as if we're living in quite different universes
Yes.
or different realities.
Hmm.
And that's very interesting. It's very
Yes.
interesting because
That is the case, and it's not relativism where, you know, there's no, like, it's just whatever you think is, that's the truth, and whatever he thinks, that's the truth. And no, there is, you know, greater degrees of truth, lesser degrees of truth. And from a higher perspective, what appeared to be truth at this level becomes, you know, could be seen as illusion, or not really the case, but it's held, you know, in the context of seeing that it seemed to be. So it becomes levels of seeming, levels of appearance, you know. And those that are in the midst of awakening, or they're unfolding, you know, they are the vehicles for the unfoldment of the realization of their divinity actually have a greater degree of responsibility, we could say, impersonal, because they're holding that broader vision. And those that don't have eyes to see don't really have the capacity to be responsible in the way that I'm speaking about.
Right.
They're limited by their own um, sort of delusive ideas of what's going on. And so that's where the compassion factor is very much present, because you can see that that's the case. It's not like a belief. It's not, oh, someone said that everybody's just doing the best they can and everybody's seeing from their own perspective, because that's easily forgotten, isn't it? And not that it can't, sort of be overshadowed after we've already had a shift in identity, but the likelihood of it staying around or lasting, or being the place that we're coming from, decreases. And that decreases more and more as it is an integrated condition and as we unfold, higher stages of development. So Dharma always is referential to the presence of divinity. And that's
That's
what
beautiful. Say that again, Andrew. That was brilliant.
Dharma is always referential to the presence of divinity.
Ooh, I love it.
So as the presence of divinity becomes brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter and clearer and clearer and clearer about itself, then Dharma, like I said earlier, is just a spontaneous naturalness. It's not something that
Right.
needs to be contrived, efforted, brought about. And that tends to include the total context of the evolution that is appearing within that broader vision. So if someone is seeing from sort of a higher place on the mountain, you might say, they see things, details, whatever the case may be, that those that are a little bit lower cannot see.
Right.
And in that, there's a greater degree of responsibility, and there's also, a natural compassion and a spontaneous expression of what's appropriate in the context of that vision and, in the holding of that. But it can't be thought about, necessarily. It more and more it becomes something that is it's not, comprehensible by the mind, even though the intellect can be aligned with,
Right.
the truth of our infinite nature. It still doesn't require, kind of a bunch of processing, because it's so immediate. And that's where we see a real clarity come online, is in the immediacy, the spontaneity beginning to step into itself more and more and more. And with that comes a certainty, a certainty. So, there's clearing of doubt and all of those different things that is a progressive unfoldment. But the presence of divinity expresses as Dharmic direction, naturally, spontaneously. And it includes the whole environment.
Right. Because every action that we take, every word that we speak, every thought that we have,
Yes.
it goes out into the universe and it influences and affects every particle of the universe.
Yes.
It goes on, like if I'm saying this word, but it touches my computer and then it touches the wall over there and then it goes out through the building and the trees and then the larger environment, and it goes on forever. It goes out to other solar systems and to the galaxy and other galaxies, and it never stops, because that's the way waves propagate, and so to be able to take into consideration every possible effect of every possible thought or action, it's really something beyond the capacity of the human intellect. Therefore, the action has to be spontaneous. It just has to be, because we can't, if you have to stop and think that hard about every thought you have or every action, it's like the whole life would just shut down. You just grind to a halt. So
that's it. And I love your point about, just every action and every thought and every gesture, whatever it is. And it's important to note too that it is that, but it's also our response to that. It's also the way we are with a thought. So, the thoughts are arising on their own.
Yeah.
The actions are arising on their own. There's part of, there's that sort of karmic um, spring that's unfurling, as this, as that, whatever. And the way in which we as the self are holding that, the way in which we see that,
Mm,
do we make it into an enemy? Do we make it wrong? Do we blame? Or do we own?
or
Do we
judge.
have, yeah,
Yeah.
or change? Yeah, or is there some? It's all about the vision, in a certain sense. Mm. And that very much translates into how it ripples out into the total field.
Oh, that's a beautiful point. It sounds like you're also saying that it's all about one's relationship with oneself,
Yes.
right? So it's like if it's if one can establish, if a person can establish a really healthy relationship
Mm-hmm.
with their own self, then even if um, say, an intention doesn't manifest the way it was intended or something, like you don't define success,
Sure.
and you mentioned that earlier too, that like our culture has defined success for us to a large
Yes.
degree, and that's not always, those definitions of success aren't always aligned with individual
No.
karma. But
No, they're
in
not.
those cases where there's a, like a disconnect
Mm.
between the individual intention and the cosmic intention, how those are the key moments that we have to think about. How do we handle those moments? If
Mm.
you're completely aligned with dharma and everything you're doing is spontaneously correct, and you're not creating any bad karma for yourself, then it doesn't matter. Go and enjoy, but it's those moments where it doesn't line up, and
Yes.
where it's that we have to, that it's useful to think about, well, how can a person employ the principles of dharma in those situations
Mm-hmm.
in order to bring the level of experience back into grace, basically
Yes.
back into
Yes.
alignment with divine intention without pain. Because one of the things about that snapback is that a certain amount of momentum gets going behind everything we do, right? So if you
Mm.
start moving away, there's a certain amount of momentum, and it's going to require, nature is going to require from its side a certain amount of force to bring that momentum that you've got going to help bring you back into alignment with wholeness. And so um, sometimes that force and the tension that's created there can give rise to uncomfortable experiences. So
Yeah.
part of the story is, if we're on this path and we're very sensitive, how can we do what we need to do
Mm.
even in the worst of situations, and still be able to live life in a way which is, dignified and comfortable and
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
worth living, life worth living, fulfilled.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful point. I think, I, the snapback can be helpful every once in a while. I've experienced a few of those, but it doesn't have to be the default,
Right.
way of
Exactly.
being. And I think that when we do taste those, sort of harvesting the most evolutionary potential out of them means allowing them to be that which supports a different way of being, moving forward, so that it's not a repeat, just snap, 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 snap like that. That's not, that's not really, something's not, something, something isn't clicking. So they have value, but at the same time, there's a different possibility, and there's degrees of snap as well. It's not always, huge. It can be softer, and
Yes, it can be softer. I think your point about the compassion
mm,
and being not as judgmental, but having a relationship with oneself,
yeah,
it's more kind of accepting and protecting and recognizing. Um, Also, it helps to have some awareness of what the Dharma is at different points. Like if the conscience can become more finely attuned,
mm,
right? Whatever the tools we have that help us stay aligned with Dharma, those
mm,
can be honed or attuned or enhanced,
yes,
then that will help just naturally doing the right thing.
yeah, yeah. I think that no matter no matter where we find ourselves, in this experience, we all have a dharma to heal, right now at this time on our planet. So, but the way in which that healing is going to show up for us is going to be different, and it's going to have a unique flavor. And there's also, perhaps some unhealthy tendencies when it comes to healing for some, and they've misunderstood what that means, and they're sort of taking on things or making it into some sort of a job that becomes a burden or whatever. So it's important, to recognize that we all have the Dharma of healing. Now there's a lot that is seeking healing. There's a lot that is looking for resolution.
Yes. Oh,
And
that's
that
beautiful. Resolution, yes. Completion, yes.
completion, yeah. And we're the context for that. We're the space within which that, expresses itself. So seeing that, what appears to be our occupational dharma, you know, our cultural dharma, all of those other different aspects really become vehicles for this sort of frontline dharma of healing.
So beautiful. It's really,
And they have the potential to serve that.
yeah. So the question then is how, if being aligned with Dharma, if we could say that that condition or that state
Mm.
of self has energy signature, or it has a characteristic quality that was easily recognizable or flagged somehow,
Mhm.
that in the mind, in the subconscious and unconscious or even conscious level of the mind, we could identify it quickly,
Mm.
then it would be easier for people to know when their actions are aligned with Dharma. Because I think you mentioned there's something beautiful you mentioned earlier. It was like a feeling of being at home. I
Mhm.
think you mentioned that when you were talking about it being spontaneous. A
Yes.
feeling of like, I'm safe, I'm whole, I'm in the company of my most trusted friend, myself,
Mhm.
the person who knows me best, who
Mm.
loves me most,
Yeah.
and that in that place of sort of sacred safety and healing space that I create for myself, that actions that align with that sense of wholeness and comfort and security and um, easiness, easiness and gentleness with myself, that one can trust that those actions, thoughts, feelings, expressions will also reflect that same quality to the environment and have that
Mhm.
same level of support for others as well.
Mhm.
Because you can't really know exactly what the next person is experiencing
Sure.
exactly. So we can only sort of infer based on our own experience and the fact that consciousness has this reflective quality, that
Mhm.
when we see it there, that reflects over here. And
Mhm.
when over there sees this, it reflects back. So um, that's the closest that we come, because as consciousness expands the reflective quality, one realizes, oh, well, that's because it is myself.
Mm.
But even so, we can't deny the reality of the material level of creation that has been created in order for boundaries to exist.
Mm.
So we have to also honor and respect those boundaries. So I think part of the story of Dharma is that it's an inner condition that supports our ability to interact with the boundaries and limitations of the relative in a way which is always spontaneously life supporting,
Mm.
reflecting divine intention. And your point
Yeah.
is an internal condition. Sorry. My mind's rolling a little slowly, but yeah, it's an internal condition. It starts as an internal condition, but it reflects to the surface. I guess that's the point I was making.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a beautiful point. And we can also look at Dharma in the context of renunciation versus a householder way of being.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Like
And I know austerity there is there is renunciation, but there's different ways in which that can show up. So
Mhm.
if we have certain ideas about what the goal of life is, or what the function of being here is, and that includes perhaps liberation, going beyond. But it doesn't include the context within which that is going to appear, and it's being taken out of context. Let's say if someone was taking renunciate teachings from the East that were in a different time period,
Right.
and being spoken to a different group, and then attempting to apply them now in a Western family environment, they're going to run into issues.
Yeah.
And so that would be, and it's going to be apparent, I would say, to a certain degree, if we have some self-honesty, that something is out of alignment.
Right.
So Dharma also includes, being clear about what it means to be in the world, but not of the world, and how,
Mm.
the presence of divinity expresses itself in reference to the field of form and activity. And it doesn't mean that we are ever limited to it. We don't have to be, we become like a lotus leaf in the water. The water just runs right off. It doesn't stick to us anymore.
Mm.
But there's an increase, we could say, from a certain perspective, in our capacity to respond in alignment with the totality. Mm.
Yeah.
So it's not a decrease, it's an increase. We don't find ourselves being able not to respond, but to respond in a way which is most evolutionarily supportive in a given situation.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I agree. I do feel that that's one of the issues that is up for consideration at this time,
Mhm.
is that the Western world and Western understanding. Oh, excuse me, my camera sometimes goes out of alignment with its dharma. Every once in a while that happens. There we go. Um, that right now our world is looking to the past
Mhm.
to draw upon the ancient traditions that have lasted thousands of years, to see what we can extract from that that will be valuable to support a higher spiritual uh, to provide better spiritual support for the people of this century and this
Mhm.
time. But the problems and challenges that we face are very different from the types of challenges that people faced 5,000, even 100 years ago, but much less 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 or whatever years ago. It's a very different type of world that we live in. So we definitely have the responsibility at this time to become clear enough to determine which aspects of that truth are really eternal truth
Mhm.
that need to be sort of cultivated and maintained in their purity, and which aspects must be modified to a certain degree in order to accommodate the needs of the present time. The other thing that's happening now is very different than what happened spiritually 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, is that there are a lot more people living on earth, and the awakening process is flowing more quickly through the collective.
Mm.
Like larger and larger numbers of people are waking up all the time. And
Mhm.
I don't think the earth is, or human race has seen anything quite like this before.
Mhm.
So we're a little bit like pioneers, that
Mhm.
we're looking at a situation that we don't really have a precedent for exactly, but we do have some support from the ancient teachings and the wisdom of the seers of the past, to know what does work at, for on more of a universal level.
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. And I think that it just reveals how important it is to really look at things in context,
Yeah.
and to be honest with ourselves, uh, or to even just be willing to be shown
Mm.
what the most fluid, aligned possibility is for us.
Mm.
Yeah. Many also have sort of renunciate tendencies. Perhaps they were in a renunciate lifetime before, but now they're in a different environment.
Yeah.
So those are still there, karmically speaking, and they have the tendency to be attracted to those kinds of, the world is an illusion, leave it all behind, chop away the ties of all of this nonsense kind of a thing. And that has its place. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but it's very, very specific. It's very, very much in the immediacy of who's hearing it, when, and what is the broader perspective that is held within. And then on the other side of that, we have those that sort of, perspectives that go too far in the other direction, with sort of really getting lost in trying to make things the way that they feel they should be, rather than seeing how they fit into the totality, rather than seeing how they fit into the whole.
Mm, mm,
So
mm.
one is totally leaving behind the, collective and everything that seems to be present in it. And the other one is sort of overly focused on, how am I going to make things the way that I feel that they should be in order for me to be comfortable in this one body, and not really seeing beyond that.
Right.
So there's a fine balance there. And I think that it really shows us how important spiritual teachings are, that are really aligned and express a value of truth which embraces life, but at the same time doesn't make it into something that it isn't, and doesn't get stuck in, the various limitations that could potentially arise in that flow of experience.
Yeah, I can see from what you're saying that part of the challenge is being able to honor and recognize where one is at right here and now in
Mhm.
whatever state of development, but at the same time, be able to continually, in an accelerated fashion, even moving towards greater and greater alignment, thinking, and I love what you said of thinking in terms of how I evolve in context with wholeness, or
Mhm.
how the individual, what their relationship is with that divinity or with that totality.
Mhm.
And so there there seem to be a lot of cultural conditionings that have made it a little harder than it needs to be over
Mhm.
time. And I think part of that story is that inevitably transformation occurs on the evolutionary path. Like, that's what the evolutionary path is about, is transforming, becoming ever more complete expression of totality at the surface. And divinity is doing it. But there are well-developed structures in our culture, in our reality, that kind of help keep people a little stuck in their past.
Mhm.
Part of the story is that as they're evolving forward, as we evolve forward, even as a collective, we're, like I said, pioneers. So we're moving into new territory. A lot of experiences that have not been previously defined, or if they were defined 5,000 years ago, they don't make as much sense today in today's context as they did back then. And so the new territory is not only unknown a little bit, it's like, but also there's some structures that, at least I've noticed this, that
Yeah.
are both internal and external,
Mhm.
that cause a person to be a little bit caught in, oh, what an idiot I was. Something
Mhm.
like that. Like they evolved from some condition into a higher, more complete, more perfect expression of themselves. But there's that part that looks back and goes, well, you really messed up there. Oh, look
Mhm.
at, oh,
Mhm.
and all the kind of I don't know what, playground taunting and these things, these experiences that go way, they're very primordial. They've gone back in the collective memory of humanity for centuries and centuries,
Yeah.
of that you see somebody evolve a little bit forward, and so you really ridicule them for what they had been before that evolution, because the evolution shows, like the whole thing, there's a kind of transparency that occurs when that evolutionary transformation takes place, and it reveals the part that needed to change. And when that part gets revealed, then all of a sudden it becomes vilified as well. I guess that's where that I was trying to. And
Yeah, it's a vilification,
I've
exactly.
kind of just, digressed into this little spot here.
No,
So
that's great. I love it.
it kind of hampers people's evolution a little bit sometimes, once in a while or something. But for some reason, it's been, I think, a little bit up for consideration, because we are dealing with these issues at a collective level, which means sometimes small issues are held systemically, and they need to be eliminated at a collective level, which is why I bring it before everyone who's watching this podcast.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's a really great point. And of course, I think it is a vilification of so many different things. I mean, we could look at it in terms of specificity and, experience, like doing this or doing that or not doing this, whatever the case may be, but also just the 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 understanding of the ego in general has been vilified to a certain degree.
Right. Oh,
And
absolutely.
that's a huge limitation. And it arises from a misunderstanding of, what egoity is, because it's not really the ego, but the identification with it. That's the issue. We transcend the identification, no longer an issue in the same way. So, but there's this sort of, it's kind of like, but the truth is that only the identification with the ego would vilify itself. It's not coming from the self. It's coming from this illusory identity with separation.
Right. Yes.
And that is what is seeing all of those things, as being awful in the past, and holding people accountable, and not wanting to see that there are miracles and transformations and possibilities of total recontextualizations of life, because that is a reality, and that is happening. And to the degree that we sort of turn our nose at that and say that's not possible, or is to the degree that we're really limiting ourselves. It doesn't do anything to the out there, and it never was the out there that we were seeing. It was only our own limited vision. And so then again, we place ourselves in a space of limitation. So it's a great point. And then in terms of the subtle structures which are supporting that, which they are, here it's not, and they of course are feeding off of the vilification and the making into an issue and the wrongdoing and the guilt and the shame and all of that. But we, on some level, are participating actively, in the sense that we are providing the food, we're providing the sustenance, we are, and so it's so important for us to be willing to stand in truth, to stand in deeper and deeper levels of truth. And that's that, the fourth, if we're holding on to something, we're not in that little pinky leg there, which isn't smaller than the rest, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
The austerity, the renunciation, the letting go, the leaving behind of that which no longer serves.
Right. Right.
So on the foundation of truth and commitment and the already present flow and the pull to evolve, we're able to take that step. We're able to sever our old way of seeing. Not that there won't be bits and pieces of residue that come back up from time to time, but we're able to see them for what they are. And we're no longer living in that, which is what really makes the difference, because we have matured into a space of, really seeing what is important.
I think your point about the ego, it really ties in beautifully right there, because it's when the individual is no longer identified with the past actions and with the level of self identity that gave rise to the past actions, and it has actually moved fully out of that space. Then even if the environment tries to bring it back up again, oh, remember when you did that thing, Joe, you were such an idiot, or whatever, that the part of the self, because the identification is there, it doesn't at all grip. It's like like you were saying, like water sliding off of the lotus leaf.
Yes.
It just slides off, and that maintenance of the alignment in the central flow of Dharma,
Mhm.
it's like a force, like a train rolling down a track or something, that it's like, yeah, he can remind me of whatever, but I'm right here. I'm just right here,
Exactly.
and I'm just continuing to go forward and evolve because this is the only place it feels like home.
Yes. Yeah, that's such a beautiful point. And if we notice that something comes up when that is reflected back to us, what it's revealing is that we have a new level of limited identification, which appears to be in conflict with the old level of limited identification.
Oh, interesting.
So
Yes.
it's like now we're trying to, there's something there that is trying to run away from that or doesn't. So there's a transparency when
Mhm.
we're free of that limited sense of self. We become transparent. And
Mhm.
because we see that it's really impersonal in the sense that it's only the self that is evolving within itself, experiencing itself, then those things now are not, they don't have, those arrows don't have a place to land anymore. They
Well
go
put.
straight
Well put.
through. And if there is a landing spot and there's maturity, then we're glad that the arrow came because now we see, oh, there was something here that I wasn't seeing, but this has revealed.
Mhm.
Yeah. Why
Beautiful.
is there defensiveness? Why is there a combative sort of frustration or concern or whatever the
Exactly.
case may
Yeah.
be? Where is that coming from?
Right.
Mm,
Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Because when the individual realizes that all interactions are actually self interactions of
mhm,
divinity through
mhm.
us, like we're the vehicle,
Yeah.
each person is the vehicle, and divinity self interacts, then it's really safe.
Yes.
When a situation comes up like that, maybe an arrow finds a landing spot.
Mhm,
It's it instead of it being a situation that elicits a feeling of being threatened,
mhm.
it takes on the condition of being more like a challenge.
Yeah.
And on that note, I learned something very interesting about the autonomic nervous system this week.
Oh,
So
cool.
this seems like a good spot to share that.
Yeah,
And
please.
that is that the autonomic nervous system has the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And
Mhm.
the parasympathetic is rest and digest and heal and reproduce. And the sympathetic is fight or flight or freeze.
Mhm, mhm.
But it turns out, I just learned this recently by a beautiful talk by a man named Don Estes, who does micro harmonics or something. He works with sound. A very interesting man. And and what he was saying is that actually both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems have two modes. One mode is where they're responding to life experience as a threat, and the other mode is where they're responding to life experience as a challenge.
Mm,
And that the
mhm.
parasympathetic nervous system orients more towards um, like reduced activity. So rest and digest when or it can bring you to
Allow.
yes, allow when
Mm,
when life is seen as a threat, it can cause a person to kind of retract and pull away from life experience. But when it is, when the life experience is seen as a challenge, it the it can lead the nervous system into a state of transcending.
mhm,
Whereas the sympathetic nervous system, when life is seen as a challenge,
mhm,
then it can actually give rise to like access to all of your resources and energy and creative thought and spontaneous right action. But when life is seen as a threat, the sympathetic nervous system will go into fight or flight response. But it's
mhm,
more of like an active response to experience, whereas parasympathetic is more of a passive response
mhm.
to experience. But they have these two dual modes. And so it just reminded me of what you were saying that,
Beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah, and then they're simultaneously operative, right? Or it's not an either or situation. So
right,
you
right.
could have like sort of knee jerk sympathetic reaction, and that can be then held by the parasympathetic on the level of allowing it to be there and sort of resting back in.
Mm,
So it's not that one is there and the other isn't, but
Right.
sort of a play of dominance, and in terms of
Beautiful
our
point.
what we see ourselves to be, I believe the parasympathetic nervous system becomes more of a dominant way of being, I think, on some level, because we're moving out of that sort of animal, sort of bodily identification,
Right.
as a sort of baseline point of reference, and into a more, yeah, aligned, neutral,
Right.
not that things won't come up, but that they'll be held in that sort of softness and responsiveness of, uh, yeah,
Yeah.
allowing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the sympathetic nervous system, when it's really functioning optimally,
Mm-hmm.
it definitely is responsible for like experiences of bliss,
Oh, okay. Okay.
experiences of great joy and exhilaration and like,
Mm-hmm.
success and accomplishment and
Right.
winning and like
Right.
that. Um, Whereas the parasympathetic, because it's more passive in a way, it doesn't ever quite bring those levels of those kind of high levels of excitement with it. But I
Okay. I
agree
see.
that up till now, particularly sympathetic is definitely associated with healing specifically.
Mm,
And I think that could partly be because this is what our time needs, what the culture needs now, that the whole world, the whole West development of Western life has been very outward in its nature and um, action oriented.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a good time for it to come back in and be a little more self referral, a little more silence oriented. And but I think that it's the bliss that supports the integration. And ultimately,
Yeah.
healing does require an integration of totality with individuality, or
Mm-hmm.
a integration of totality in the field of the relative. That's another way to think of it. So I think both are necessary, but but it seems from my perspective that we haven't understood it well enough to be able to um, culture our nervous system so that it's functioning at its optimal point. And now deeper understanding, and it just came because I realized as you were speaking, I said, oh, Andrew's got it, he understands this thing intellectually. So then I just was kind of tying it into the whole idea of the physicality of the body, and
Yeah.
how that there's actually the sympathetic nervous system feels different when we're like in an exhilarated mode of dealing with a problem as a challenge that can be overcome than it feels when we're dealing with the problem as a threat. And that once we identify those feelings, we can favor, like you said, dominance. You can allow that flavor to be more dominant. Allow it. So the parasympathetic and the sympathetic working together to support the full potential of both.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
To
So it's,
support
thanks
bliss.
for sharing that about the bliss. So it's the harmonious expression of both levels of intelligence, and
Yeah.
moving out of the sort of more reactive to responsive, and the
Yeah.
way in which that's most aligned with the whole. So just like with all of our physiology, as we become more clear about what we are, then the aspects of our nervous system also become more clear about what they are in a certain sense, and come online in a new way. So it's like
Yes.
an awakened or enlightened nervous system, and that
Right.
includes both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So
Right.
it's not that we want to be all, that there isn't an active dynamic expression, but that dynamism and stillness are just sort of married together, flowing together, expressing in a very harmonious way.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And then it's like when it comes to that point that the nervous system actually changes,
Mm,
like it restructures itself, then one directly experiences a spontaneous right action. And we
yes.
don't have to think because the nervous system has already been cultured to do that. And the awareness, when we know, then you can bring your awareness can be brought to the nervous system to
Mhm.
support that change.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's such a great understanding. I think maybe even in the word challenge could, you know, be
Mm.
replaced by like opportunity,
Yep.
or um, evolutionary possibility. So
Yeah.
it's something that doesn't require kind of force, effort, control, but through allowing, through receiving, through aligning, we begin to see everything as just evolutionary possibility, everything as an opportunity for integration, for unification, for whatever it may be. So it's no longer a threat. Threats are non-existent, because even when there's an initial arising of what appears to be a threat-based response, that becomes instantly included in
Right.
what is a possibility for,
Evolution.
evolution. Exactly.
That's so beautiful. I love it, Andrew. That's really
Mhm.
beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.